Hello brothers and sisters, welcome to another episode here on Dangerous African Confessions HD. In this episode, we have a story from one of our sisters, who shares with us the painful and life-destructive journey she took. She reveals to us about how she lost her family which took her to this place. Now the twist is when she met this angel in her life. This is a story of how much of God's people are still around and doing the work of the Most High in different ways. Without taking much of your time, let us now go into what our sister has for us today. Please subscribe if you haven't done so, and also do like and share this video, so others out there can also benefit from this conversation. And also hit the notification bell, so you will be notified anytime we upload videos.
Brother, I will talk about my life as it is expected of me. But me telling my story is not for pity, but I wanted to do this to let people know that there are some good people out there, that people do not get to hear of them. My story will eulogize a certain man who came through for me. In fact, he is an evangelist who shares the message one-on-one with people he comes across. And that fateful day, he was not any ordinary person, but was an angel sent to save me from joining my family in the afterlife. The day he entered my life, changed everything for me. He has been a blessing in my life and so many others that people don't get to hear. The strange thing is that he doesn't even own a church for him to collect offerings and all those things pastors have been collecting. Let me start the story in a way that will make sense to everyone that will take time to listen to me. My life was shaped by a profound loss and regret. You see, when I told you I am just a little above 40, you were shocked. I was often older than this few years ago. Physically, I was much older than my age. Because of what I had to put this body through. Everything back then was a reflection of the emotional and physical toll my life journey had taken. You see, I was born and raised in a small but close-knit community where everyone knew one another. My parents were hardworking and loving, instilling in me the values of humility and perseverance. Though life was modest, I grew up dreaming of a future filled with love and purpose. And after years of life, I met my husband, Daniel, at a local community event. He was the kind of man who lit up a room, not with charm, but with a quiet kindness that drew people to him. Daniel worked as an electrician, a trade he had inherited from his father, and was known for his reliability and generosity. Our relationship was simple and sweet. The time came, and we married in a small ceremony at the church, surrounded by family and friends. Our home was a modest two-bedroom house. The walls were painted in warm hues, and the furniture was second-hand but chosen with care. To be honest, we didn't have much, but our home was filled with laughter, love, and hope for the future. 2 years into the marriage, we welcomed our daughter, Ella. She was the embodiment of joy, with bright eyes and an infectious giggle that could melt even the hardest heart. Ella's arrival brought a new sense of purpose to our lives. My husband and I worked tirelessly to provide for her, dreaming of giving her a life filled with opportunities we never had. Our days were spent in simple pleasures, family picnics at the park, bedtime stories with Ella curled up between us, and Sunday afternoons cooking together. It was a home built on love, trust, and unwavering support. The question you asked is the most difficult aspect of this whole journey. You asked what happened to this family. Well, the day started like any other. Daniel had received a call from a client about an electrical issue in a remote location, a job he had done countless times. This time, he decided to take Ella along. She loved spending time with her father, and he thought the trip would be a fun little adventure for her. It was unusual for him to take Ella on jobs, but she had begged to go that morning, her excitement irresistible. I was also preoccupied with errands and trusting Daniel's judgment. I agreed. This is the most painful decision that has gotten to me all this while. It was a decision that came back to haunt me for the rest of my life. My home, once a sanctuary, became a haunting reminder of all I had lost. Every corner held echoes of laughter now silenced, every object a relic of a life that no longer existed. The guilt and sorrow consumed me, setting me on the downward spiral that would define the years to come. That day was an unremarkable morning, the kind where life feels steady and predictable. Ella had insisted on carrying her own snacks for the adventure with her father. Daniel had reassured me with his usual calm smile, saying, "We'll be back before dinner." I spent the day running errands, tidying the house, and planning a special meal for when they returned. Ella had recently developed a fascination with baking, and the two of us had planned to make chocolate chip cookies that evening. The hours passed without much thought, but as the afternoon stretched on, an uneasy feeling began to creep in. By evening, when they still hadn't returned, worry turned to panic. I tried calling Daniel's phone repeatedly, but there was no answer. The call came just as dusk was settling over the neighborhood. I was pacing in the living room when the phone rang. Relief washed over me momentarily, believing it was Daniel calling to explain the delay. But the voice on the other end wasn't his. It was calm and professional, the police officer. "Brother, I didn't understand, but I needed to hear what he wanted to talk anyways. He asked me if I am the wife of Daniel. When I said yes, he continued that they were calling to inform me that there's been an accident." At that moment, my heart stopped. The words seemed to echo endlessly in my mind, but I clung to the hope that they were merely hurt, that I would find them at the hospital with cuts and bruises but alive. I didn't wait for the officer to finish. I demanded details, desperate for anything to assure me that my family was still intact. When the officer hesitated, honestly, my desperation turned to dread. Then came the words that shattered my world. He then went ahead to tell me that my husband and daughter didn't make it. You see, I didn't scream or cry at first. Instead, a cold numbness enveloped me as if my body refused to process the enormity of what I had just heard. I cannot really explain to you what I went through that moment the police officer told me that. My legs gave way, and I sank to the floor. Time seemed to freeze as my mind raced through memories of Daniel and Ella, our laughter, their voices, the warmth of their presence. When the police arrived to escort me to the site, the reality began to sink in. The journey was agonizing, each mile feeling like a step closer to a nightmare I couldn't escape. I arrived to see emergency vehicles, flashing lights, and a small crowd gathered at the edge of the scene. I spotted Daniel's truck, parked crookedly on the gravel path. Then I saw the small, brightly colored backpack Ella had carried that morning, now lying abandoned near the worksite. That's when the tears finally came, an uncontrollable flood that left me gasping for air. At this point, no amount of comfort from the office meant anything. They tried to comfort me, but their words were meaningless. My husband and daughter were gone, and no amount of sympathy could bring them back. I was taken to the hospital to formally identify their bodies. Walking into the cold, sterile room felt like stepping into another reality. There they were, Daniel and Ella, lying side by side. Daniel's face was calm, almost as if he was sleeping, but his hands bore the burns. Ella's small body looked fragile, a stark contrast to the vibrant little girl she had been just that morning. Seeing my daughter lying so still broke something inside me. I remember I tried reaching out to touch Ella's hand, only to be met with the coldness of death. I collapsed beside them, crying out in anguish, begging them to wake up, to tell me it was all a mistake. But the silence was deafening. That night when I was taken back home, the house was no longer a home. When I walked through the door, the emptiness hit me like a physical force. Ella's toys were still scattered in the living room, her tiny shoes neatly placed by the door. The dinner table, set for 3, became a cruel reminder of the family that no longer existed. That night, I wandered aimlessly through the house, touching objects that had once been part of our daily lives, Daniel's work jacket hanging on the back of a chair, Ella's favorite stuffed animal lying on her bed. Each item felt like a relic of a life that had been ripped away. I couldn't bring myself to sleep in our bed. Instead, I curled up on the living room floor, clutching Ella's stuffed animal and crying until exhaustion claimed me. As the days turned into weeks, I was consumed by guilt. I started to replay the morning of the accident over and over in my mind. Why did I let Ella go? Why hadn't I insisted they stay home? You see, I wouldn't want to take anything away from my family and friends, and even my neighbors. They really did their best. But it wasn't enough as compared to the loss and pain that was within me. I felt like an outsider in my own life, watching as my grief swallowed my whole. Every corner of the house was a reminder of what I had lost, and every moment was a battle to keep breathing. You see, this was the beginning of my descent, a life once filled with love and hope now reduced to a shell of grief and despair. Yes, I understand. But I want you to understand my journey, so you can appreciate the man, when I begin to tell you about him. After the funeral, I became a shadow of myself. The woman who once radiated love and joy was now consumed by a grief so profound it seemed to seep into my very soul. I withdrew from the world, shutting out anyone who tried to help. For weeks, I barely left the house, surviving on scraps of food and endless cups of coffee. The silence in the home was unbearable, broken only by the sound of my own sobs and that of my family that were around me the whole time. The truth is that, even though they were there in the house, I never saw them. Because I was lost in this world. Every corner of the house reminded me of what I had lost. The toys in Ella's room, Daniel's tools in the garage, all of it felt like cruel taunts from a life I could never return to. The beginning of it all started with alcohol. You see, my first escape came in the form of alcohol. At first, it was just a glass of wine to help me sleep, but soon it became a nightly ritual. The numbing effect was comforting, offering a brief reprieve from the relentless pain. One glass turned into two, then a bottle, and before long, I was drinking from morning to night. I found myself frequenting local bars, places where no one knew me and no one asked questions. I liked the anonymity, the way the dim lighting and loud music drowned out my thoughts. It didn't take long before I started drinking harder liquors, chasing the oblivion they promised. Alcohol wasn't enough. The void in my heart was too vast, and the pain too deep. The loneliness was too deep and heavy for me. During one of my late-night outings, in my haze of alcohol abuse, I sought solace in human connection. But instead of meaningful relationships, I found myself in fleeting, toxic entanglements. What I did was that I mostly gravitated toward people as broken as I was, men who offered me attention but not love, companionship but not care. The relationships were destructive, often fueled by drugs and alcohol. Many of the men I encountered were manipulative or abusive, taking advantage of my vulnerability. But I didn't care. For brief moments, they filled the emptiness inside of me, and that was enough. My brother, I have done a lot in my life. And despite everything I tried, alcohol, drugs, risky relationships, nothing could fill the void left by Daniel and Ella. The fleeting moments of pleasure were always followed by crushing guilt and regret. I often found myself alone in the early hours of the morning, staring at the stars and wondering if they could see me, if they were ashamed of the person I had become. The truth is that my descent into this dark, destructive life was a desperate attempt to escape my pain. But no matter how far I ran or how deeply I buried myself in my vices, the grief was always there, waiting for me. You remember earlier before this conversation, I told you I have the HIV virus. It was through this needless and reckless lifestyle that I got it. You see, in my spiral of self-destruction, caution and self-preservation became foreign concepts. The fleeting moments of connection I saw through the risky relationships often came without concern for consequences. I lived in the moment, chasing numbness, my pain clouding any thought of the future. When I meet these men, there were no discussions of safety or precautions, such thoughts felt irrelevant in my numb state. It got to a time when my health began to decline, I dismissed it as the toll of excessive use of alcohol and all the things I have been engaged in. I ignored the persistent fatigue, frequent fevers, and the weight loss that left me gaunt and hollow-eyed. Later I convinced myself that I needed to go and see the doctor. This was when I learned the truth. I sat in the cramped waiting room, restless and impatient, as the staff ran tests. When the doctor called me in, I noticed the solemn expression on his face. He explained my results gently, but the words still hit me like a freight train, HIV positive. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. I thought about Daniel and Ella, about the person I used to be. And then I began to think about the choices I had made, the risks I had taken, and how it had all led to this. I left the clinic in a daze, clutching the pamphlets the doctor had handed me, though I didn't bother to read them. The diagnosis felt like a death sentence, another cruel twist of fate in a life that seemed determined to break me. I think it was a week or so after I returned from the hospital. One cold night, sitting alone, the weight of my life pressed down on me. I thought about Daniel's warmth, Ella's laughter, and the life we had built together. I then thought about the choices I had made since their deaths, the people I had hurt, and the person I had become. The grief was no longer a sharp pain but a heavy, constant ache that made every breath feel like a burden. My diagnosis felt like the final blow, confirming what I had come to believe: I was beyond redemption. That night, I decided I couldn't go on. The thought of waking up another day to the same cycle of pain and despair was unbearable. I gathered the few belongings I had, a bottle of pills, a pen, and a crumpled piece of paper. I wrote a letter, though the words came out disjointed and chaotic. I apologized to Daniel and Ella, begged for their forgiveness, and confessed that I no longer had the strength to keep going. I placed the note beside me and prepared to take the pills, determined to end my suffering. I honestly don't know what happened. For some strange reason I did decide to go and bring my daughter's toys before I end it all. That was when I heard a faint knock on the door. It had been days, maybe weeks, since anyone had come looking for me. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but the persistence of the knock stirred something within me. Against my better judgment, I shuffled to the door and opened it. Standing there was a man, tall and gentle-looking, dressed in a simple suit with a Bible tucked under his arm. He told me that he has been visiting this area, reaching out to those who might need help. My first instinct was to shut the door, but something in his demeanor stopped me. There was no pity in his eyes, only kindness and understanding. He explained that he had been walking the streets, praying for those who had lost their way, when he felt drawn to this building. Honestly speaking, I didn't know why, but I let him in. Maybe it was his calm presence, or maybe it was the desperate need for human connection that I hadn't admitted to myself. That night, Pastor Emmanuel sat with me on the cold floor, listening as I poured out my story between sobs. I told him about Daniel and Ella, about the choices I had made, and about the diagnosis that felt like the final nail in the coffin of my life. He didn't interrupt or judge. He simply listened, occasionally nodding and offering a gentle word of encouragement. For the first time in years, I felt seen, not as the broken woman I had become, but as someone still worthy of compassion. Before leaving the next morning, yes, he spent the whole night with me, listening to every word that I said. The next morning, before he left, he handed me a small pamphlet with information about where he normally meets with the few people he shared words of encouragement with. He said something that struck a chord in my nerves. He said that I don't have to go through this alone, and that when I am ready, he will be here. It took me a week to muster the courage to visit his place. The thought of stepping into a place like that, after everything I had done, felt impossible. But Pastor Emmanuel's words lingered in my mind, a small glimmer of hope I couldn't ignore. When I arrived, I was greeted with open arms. The people, a mix of people from all walks of life, welcomed me without hesitation. They didn't pry into my past or look at me with pity. Instead, they treated me as one of their own. Days later, Pastor Emmanuel introduced me to a counselor who worked closely with him to bring people back to the better life they deserve. Together, they began to unpack the layers of grief, guilt, and pain that had consumed me. The pastor and his people didn't just offer me spiritual guidance, they addressed my physical and emotional needs as well. They connected me with a healthcare program that provided treatment for my HIV. The doctors and nurses were patient and kind, helping me understand how to manage my condition and improve my quality of life. He introduced me to others who had faced similar struggles. Sharing my story and hearing theirs created a sense of solidarity, reminding me that I wasn't alone in my journey. Through weekly and private sessions with Pastor Emmanuel, I rediscovered my faith. He didn't preach to me about punishment or guilt. Instead, he focused on forgiveness, grace, and the possibility of a new beginning. He encouraged me to write letters to Daniel and Ella, expressing my love, regrets, and longing. I will finish writing them, and together he will accompany me go and drop them on their gravesite. The act was cathartic, allowing me to release the burdens I had carried for so long. The long and short is that, had it not been this angel sent by God into my life, I wouldn't be here in the first place. I owe everything to him and God going forward. He also guided me through the process of forgiving myself, a monumental task that required time, patience, and prayer. Slowly, I began to see myself not as a lost cause but as someone still capable of redemption. Pastor Emmanuel continued to be a guiding presence, not just as a spiritual leader but as a friend. His unwavering belief in my potential became the anchor I clung to during my darkest moments. Like I said, I owe it to him and the people I have around me now. Thank you too for deciding to help me share my story so others out there who might be going through similar situations might know that there is a way for you. Thank you for your time.
Don't forget to please subscribe, share and like our videos. Kindly hit the notification bell so you will be the first to get notification to our videos when we upload. I want to start by saying that faith is a beautiful thing. It can lift us up in our darkest moments and guide us when we feel lost. But faith, when placed in the wrong hands, can also be a weapon that can destroy us. Like I always say, we don't do this work to condemn the church or to tell you not to believe in the church. All that we want you to know is to be careful. Also, we only want you to understand that there are good people out there, but you only have to look hard and be careful. I certainly have no much words to say. I only hope that our sister's life and story in itself is enough for us all to learn something from it. The things she has been through, and what she resulted into as a means of forgetting her pains which didn't help in the end. We should all understand that, whatever happens to us in life, the good Lord knows the purpose to which it happened. If you've ever been in a similar situation, or if you feel something's not right in your church or community, leave a comment below. Let's talk about it. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe for more true stories, because sometimes, the scariest things aren't the ones we see, they're the ones we don't.